Certainly appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Waddell. I'm Executive Vice President at OneSource Communications. I want to welcome you to our new webinar series in which we discuss key topics surrounding trending and important topics around digital transformation, which is a buzzword that is at top of mind for any of us in the technology industry. As David indicated, I'm thrilled to introduce our participants today, which is Kenneth Pinto, Systems Engineer at Cisco, as well as my friend and colleague, Chris Hope, our Senior Director of IT and Security here at Source. Kenneth, Chris, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us today.
Happy to be here.
Excellent.
Twice.
So let's just kind of talk about, what we're seeing from a trend standpoint as it relates to digital transformation. So by 2024, it's estimated that over 70% of all high spend will go towards digital transformation and innovation projects, driving over 90% of new applications to be cloud enabled. Those applications are only as good as the networks that they run on, which many of us have found out the hard way in various situations. As the cloud's up your business, certainly do not let a legacy network architecture hold it back. So today our discussion is going to be on 4 critical steps needed to prepare your network for cloud transformation and specific strategies around building a robust, high-performing, scalable, agile, secure network with optimal connectivity to enable a successful cloud transformation. That's a mouthful. Just a housekeeping note, if you have any specific question in the webinar, as David indicated, please post them in the Q&A icon in the bottom middle screen, and we will be happy to answer those as we have time. And also, a quick note, make sure you stay till the end, as we will be giving away really cool Meraki apparel to you lucky attendees at the end of the webinar. So you want to stick around in order to take advantage of that. So without further ado, gentlemen, let's jump in, if we don't mind. Got some meaty topics here to talk about, and we're going to fill this 30 minutes fairly quickly. Start off with, quite honestly, what I find typically in a lot of these engagements, something that gets just passed over immediately in regards to planning and design of these digital transformation architectures, and that's specifically with evaluation of bandwidth and bandwidth constraints. And so, Chris, maybe starting with you, talk to us about, like, when we're thinking about these things and we're beginning this process of digital transformation, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about, how to eliminate bandwidth constraints? Specifically, let's really talk about first kind of architecture, right, in regards to how traffic is actually flowing. And so maybe let's kind of start there with just, topology and architecture as a whole, and understanding that aspect to allow us then to successfully deploy, any of our digital transformation initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. So OneSource is a managed service provider, right? We specialize in telecommunications, IT, and managed security. So we have a lot of experience talking to customers about this, but honestly, some of our best stories come from the transformations that we've gone through ourselves for our own business. Like any other business, we have our own IT challenges and have gone through this transformation exercise ourselves in a lot of ways. But let's start off with just some kind of terms and definitions, get everybody on the same page, make sure that we're all talking the same language. When we think about traffic and bandwidth for a transformational exercise or a cloud environment, there's more than one metric you have to consider. There's north-south traffic, which is from a client to a server. Now, that could be from a client in an office to a server in the cloud. That could be a client on a remote VPN connection working from home to a server in your office, right? There's lots of different places that could be, but that north-south traffic is your client to server communications. That's your knowledge workers communicating with the systems, services, and data that they need to be able to do their jobs. But there's also what we call east-west traffic, which is from a server to another server. And this is especially important when you're talking about IT transformation and cloud adoption, because it's the piece that's most commonly missed. We forget to think about how our servers are connected amongst themselves, and we forget to account for what the traffic needs are between the different various components of our infrastructure. You may have a three-tiered application environment with a web server on the front end, an application middleware server, and a database on the back end. It's a really common design. What is the requirements for each of those pieces to be able to communicate to each other? How much bandwidth does each of those steps take? What pieces are good candidates to have adjacent to each other in the cloud because they're really high bandwidth, high need for communication, or require a very low latency to work properly? And which pieces can be distributed across different environments because they don't have those needs for fast communication, low latency, or high bandwidth. So those are the things to think about. You take it one step further and you add in something like SD-WAN, and now not only do you have to accommodate for your bandwidth at your source and destination, but you've also got to look at your bandwidth in between. How are you architecting your SD-WAN? Is it built on a carrier network? Is it built on an appliance-based system like what Cisco Meraki uses? And how do you size your SD-WAN to make sure that you're accommodating for all the different endpoints that are going to connect to that SD-WAN and participate on that bigger network?
So Chris, I think one of the natural tendencies is, okay, if I've got a bottleneck, let's just throw bandwidth at it, right? Let's just throw as much bandwidth at it until we correct the issue. And really, oftentimes, that's not the answer. I mean, there are certain applications out there that will take as much bandwidth as you give them. Talk about, how you optimizing applications within the environment, right? Are you actually looking at the amount of bandwidth your applications are consuming, and can that traffic be deprioritized or prioritized depending upon critical nature of the application specifically? So why don't you talk about specifically some of the things that we've learned in regards to that and some of the strategies from a optimization standpoint as it relates to application consumption?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, doing telecommunications management for other businesses, we have some specialized software that does that. And it's fairly complicated stuff. So when we were going through this transformation ourselves for our own business, we had to take the time and do the analysis on our software that we use as a business for our own internal operations to figure out what components were using the bandwidth and what were the requirements that those components needed, not just in a sense of ports and TCP or UDP, but also what latency could it tolerate before you noticed a performance difference in the application. And that's the hardest thing to be able to track in many environments, is that latency component. When you're used to having everything in the same physical location, you've got your corporate office or your corporate data center, and you've got all your servers sitting there physically right next to each other. How do you know what level of latency is acceptable? Well, you put something between them. So in our case, what we did is we started segregating things out into different network chunks, different subnets behind our firewall. And we started using our Meraki appliance to evaluate what sort of latencies, what sort of bandwidths were acceptable between the different components of the application. And what we saw is that some of the things that we expected to be really high bandwidth weren't. They were actually fairly low bandwidth, but they needed a very, very low latency to work correctly. And especially in our telecom management software, if you increase the latency even by 50%, you saw a massive difference in the user experience for the users interacting with that software. So by chunking out our environment into different segments, putting a firewall between the different segments, we're able to play with that without having to throw stuff up into the cloud and see how it worked. We could test it in our own office before we moved anything outside.
Excellent. So kind of moving to a little bit of a different topic here, but it is something that's very front of mind, specifically in our new right, with the prominence of teleworkers, remote workers due to the pandemic, the adoption of it. let's talk about the need for cloud desktop and how that plays into this conversation.
It's going to be a different answer for every company, but what we as OneSource ended up doing was moving our standard user environment into a virtual desktop running in the cloud. And there's a lot of factors that played into that, but at the end of the day, the primary factor was the latency question. Because that telecommunication management software really needed that low latency for our employees to be able to do their jobs effectively and have a good user experience doing their work, we made the decision to move the standard computing environment from the desktop or laptop that sits in front of you into a cloud VDI. Now, lots of different ways to build that out. There's no one size fits all here, but I want to encourage companies to don't make the assumption that you're stuck running everything natively on the laptop. It's easier than ever to build out a cloud VDI environment. The tools, the systems, the platforms are better than they've ever been in the state of the industry. So the ability to deploy cloud desktops at scale for all of your users of business and to make that their primary computing platform is feasible now. 5 years ago, it really wasn't, right? You had to have a 30-person IT staff with 200K paid experts in the field that were exclusively dedicated to managing an environment like this. And now the tools, the platforms have improved to the space where any size business can add this into their portfolio if that's the right decision for them. It really comes down to, what is your business trying to accomplish? What is the software you're using do behind the scenes? And what kind of experience do you want your users to have? And for us, having that best possible user experience was the key thing. We wanted to make sure that our employees could do their work as efficiently as possible, no matter where they were physically sitting, that they saw no performance penalty from working from home compared to working from the office. And for us, that made it an easy decision to invest in that cloud desktop environment so that our employees could continue to work regardless of being home for 1 week or 18 months.
Awesome. Let's switch gears a little bit, and Kenneth, coming to you here soon. But let's switch gears here a little bit. Let's talk about. All right, we've developed our digital transformation initiative or plan. We're headed to market within our organization, and what was perceived to be a 6-month conversion period elongates into a year and a half conversion period using hypotheticals. So I think one of the things, and not to mention also, no business is staying static, right? They're either adding location, decommissioning locations, decommissioning assets, adding assets. So let's talk about some of the strategies in which to accelerate location setup specifically. And so, Chris, maybe starting off with you. I mean, one of the things that we use very prominently in our team is standardization. I mean, I hear you preach it often. Talk about in the area of of speed to deployment, why that's such an important component to accelerate location setup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every IT leader who's been through this at scale knows the old saying that customization is the death of IT projects. The more that you try to accommodate every niche edge use case, the more that you try and customize every little tiny piece for every person, the harder it will be to implement, the harder it will be to support. And what you end up with is a great big ball of string at the end of the day that maybe one person understands how it all works under the hood. Standardization is everything in IT projects. The more that you can standardize your deployments, the faster you can get them out there, the easier they are for your team to support and maintain long-term, and the better your business will succeed as those changes inevitably happen. As you said, no business is static. You're going to have to add locations. You're going to have to remove locations. Maybe it's a merger and acquisition. Maybe it's just organic growth, but you're going to have to plan for change. And changing a ball of string is a nightmare. but changing when you've got a set of standards is pretty doable. And there's a lot of ways in which the Meraki platform enables us, both for ourselves and as a service provider, to be able to accomplish those things. So Kenneth, I want to kick it over to you to talk a little bit about how the Meraki platforms enables companies to help with those standards.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. I liked a couple of things. So I've just jotted stuff down as you were speaking. So you were absolutely right when you said that applications are as good as what the networks would be. But breaking down the network itself into two parts would be configuration and the continuous integration or monitoring of that. So Meraki is a very powerful technology. As we all know, it's super easy to deploy, but standardization is such a core part of what we work towards, So essentially, the main advantage of standardizing something is that the learning curve is really, really small. Because instead of customizing multiple switches, multiple devices, all you need to do is learn one device properly. If you know one device inside out, standardizing that, multiplying it across multiple locations makes troubleshooting all that faster. And if one or two people actually know how that works, that also gives that ability to the team to be super fluent when it comes to troubleshooting something. So knowing that one product is super important. And that's where Meraki helps. Meraki has something called as templates, where you can literally deploy one network prototype configuration and push it across to multiple locations. When I say multiple locations, all you need is an Excel sheet or a CSV file of the 500, 600 locations you have. The moment you upload it on dashboard, it'll take that one configuration and it'll push to all those 500 locations without any touch or provisioning. So literally zero touch network access, zero touch provisioning, zero touch deployment. In fact, even before the device even reaches the customer's location, the location is completely configured. All you need to do is plug those devices in and play. Your network is up and running. It's as simple as that. So these are some of the techniques that people use very frequently. They also standardize something as granular as port profiles, or basically, hey, port number 1 should be access port 1, or stuff like that. It's as granular as that. So that gives you the complete strength to make sure that something is deployed quick, gives you a lot of time back, which enables you to do a lot more as a network engineer. So that's the super important part where Meraki really brings its best self and puts it out for the customer there.
Kenneth, I personally think Meraki has made the world of network engineering too simple. I mean, I miss the days of having engineers telnet into 500 different firewalls to apply a separate configuration change across all of them. So I can't believe you guys don't miss those days. Well, I'm kidding, of course. Talk about one other thing, Kenneth, which I know has been extremely powerful for us, in terms of our MSP product set. But let's talk about the importance of centralized management. Like going back to kind of what I just talked about, the removing the necessity and removing the overhead of actually having to physically go out and touch every device within the network to push out a policy change or things of that nature. One of the great things about the Meraki platform is the centralized management. So maybe give us an overview of just the power of the dashboard itself, and even maybe further enhance on that in regards to some of the things that with the overlay of insight that can actually kind of take that to a different level from a Meraki experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. It's a wonderful time to be in Meraki, especially with Cisco at large, because Cisco constantly involves itself, takes over different companies, make sure that we are always invested in the best technology out there. And while I'll come to that in just a bit, the most favorite part I always often tell customers about Meraki is that it's not just simple. It's a complication that you cannot see on dashboard. Dashboard is a piece of GUI that you actually will use and consume, but the complex architectures that go behind it is what's actually beautiful. Like, for example, let's say you're troubleshooting something called as wireless health, a very simple tool we give to the customers for consumption to troubleshoot wireless problems, to troubleshoot wireless history, or like security center, where you're troubleshooting security features and stuff like that. The beauty about that is if something is wrong, we not only tell you that something is wrong, we also give you a hyperlink to go to the next page. And that's what's beautiful with Meraki. If you have the entire pane of glass that's there, you can jump from one page to the other page just as simple. So that centralized management actually not only enables you to see everything on one page, it also gives you the ability to reduce time. Because let's say you take traditional Cisco equipment and you're troubleshooting something really simple. Let's just say that, hey, the switch port's not working. You first need to run a few commands to search one table, then go back and search another table, then go back and search the third one. So moving between different parts is extremely cumbersome. But when you're doing it on the UI, since everything is on one page, framed beautifully to see, it gives you a visual representation of the network. So that centralized management is super important there. It not only preserves the mental stability of the network engineer, but it also gives you a lot of tools to make your job a lot faster. So that's my favorite part. The second part that I was talking about is we constantly keep integrating with different solutions. Like, for example, Meraki Insight is a beautiful technology. It's AI and ML built together to make sure that it's analyzing all the traffic that you're passing through the MX to give you insights about three main parts: which applications you're using and what's the kind of performance of that application. From an application perspective, let's say you're using Office 365. This happened yesterday, where for a large chunk of the day, I didn't receive any emails. And all right, I don't consider myself as a very big person in the company, but let's say that happens to Chuck Robbins. It's not fun. It's not fun when you're troubleshooting something of that stature, because the application health is super important in modern networks. If your application is down, you put in a lot of time to troubleshoot something like that. But Meraki Insight gives you a lot of information about that application's performance, not only the server, but also on the WAN and also on the LAN. So let's say I'm troubleshooting Office 365 in my environment today. It literally is telling me that my LAN response is extremely high. My WAN is not working. This application server itself is completely down. So it gives you a lot of moving parts, a lot of information in one pane of glass across 500 locations. So without even going into every location and troubleshooting, that one centralized view is telling me what's broken, where, in which part of the world. And my favorite part about this technology is that we're also bringing in a recent acquisition called Thousand Eyes, where we are studying the entire internet architecture in the world and giving that information to you on the dashboard. That's going to be coming soon. We're working towards it's a work in progress, but the limit is not there. We are just going on increasing the capabilities, functionalities, but the end goal is to make sure that that centralized visibility is there, because that's where you save the most time. And that's the most important part about troubleshooting or about just maintaining a modern network where you have critical applications.
Yeah, the enhancement on visibility to the backbone itself is something I know we're excited about. I think it's going to be extremely beneficial, to a lot of our attendees that are on the call today. Let's shift gears a little bit, gentlemen, if you don't mind. So let's shift to reliability and performance strategies, and Chris, I'll start with you. Let's talk about the incorporation of SD-WAN technology into cloud environments. And what are the advantages of having your cloud environment incorporated into your SD-WAN architecture? Let's start there. That's a meaty enough topic just in of itself.
Oh, absolutely. I did want to mention real quick before we jumped into the SD-WAN and cloud combination. I've lived as a network engineer before Meraki was really a product line, right? And so I've seen the other side of the world, where you had one tool to look at your WAN performance, and another tool to manage your routers, and another tool to manage your firewalls, and another tool to manage your wireless, and another tool to manage your switching. And all of those had to be independently managed, and all of them had about a 75% success rate of whether they actually worked across your entire stack, because one piece of hardware doesn't work exactly the same. The config's just a little bit different than the next. The night and day difference of what you can do now in this model versus what traditional network engineers have had to do over the last 20 years is crazy. So it's shocking how much the industry has changed and how far we've come. As we get into SD-WAN and cloud, this is a fun story of compatibility, because every cloud provider has their own networking model, right? Every single one of them does it differently. Google Cloud has their model for enabling networking in their cloud. AWS has their own. Azure has their own. You get into private cloud in VMware Hyper-V, that's a completely different model again. Each of these different cloud environments, whether you're going public, private, or hybrid, is going to have a specific model for how it expects the network to look. And unfortunately, they all have their own flavor, they all have their own requirements, they all have their own expectations and needs of what they want to connect to them and how they want to work. It's pretty fascinating, but if you've ever tried to hook up a multi-cloud environment between Azure, AWS, and a traditional on-premise environment, you're gonna have a bad day. I know, because I've been sitting in the room with my team trying to engineer this to make it work. And the reality is the way that AWS has designed their VPN specifications and the way that Azure has designed their VPN specifications are not compatible with each other. And if you're trying to connect an on-premise environment using a traditional rule-based firewall to either one of those environments, or even worse, to both of those at the same time, there's going to be a lot of problems. You're going to be fighting it tooth and nail the entire stretch. So the idea that you can take a platform-based system like the Cisco Meraki, you can put an appliance in every cloud environment that you have, whether that's a hybrid cloud that you've got running in a data center, whether that's public cloud in AWS or Azure, or whether that's on-premise in your office. You just put the appliance there and now it's a part of your SD-WAN, is extremely powerful. You're not having to fight these providers to meet the exact cryptography settings that they expect and the exact certificate settings that they expect. So we have found that it's been extremely powerful to leverage the appliance-based SD-WAN for cloud use cases, because now you can put that appliance there, you can put it in your cloud, and now your cloud is just part of your SD-WAN. It's just another location. You don't have to treat it as something special. You just have it as a location right there immediately. Kenneth, I know you're the expert in this, so I'm going to pop it to you to give us a little bit more detail on how that works behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So before my role as a system engineer here, I was working for 2 years with Meraki support, and the common trend across all the calls, or basically everything that came in when it came to troubleshooting, was a nightmare. Like you correctly pointed out, having an IPsec connection to either of AWS or Azure is super cumbersome to manage, because each of them have a different set of requirements, but just that there is a failover that needs to be factored in, what kind of traffic needs to go to these particular locations, and how it actually needs to be orchestrated from that standpoint. So designing that architecture, although it seems easy, it's actually really, really difficult because of various guidelines that go into both infrastructures per se. So that's the hard part. The way Meraki solves this problem is as simple as you said, right? We just put a connector on either of these clouds and we invite them into a big giant auto VPN domain. So literally, auto VPN can be configured in 3 steps. Your entire brokerage about the VPN tunnel is done by the Cisco Meraki cloud. So all you need to do in that case is just connect it, configure it to be on, and that's that. Forget about the rest of the configuration, because Meraki goes and brings everybody in one giant network and everybody can then connect. So that's how simple it is. On the back end, it's a lot more complicated, but I can't talk about that. But the simplicity about that is that everything is one branch. So now your AWS is like a remote office, your Azure is like a spoke, and the speeds are there. With the latest enhancements in the product itself, we give you 3 flavors. So depending on how many subnets you need to be exchanging, what kind of bandwidth you need, you can also choose which type of appliance or application you need on either of these platforms. We've just announced Google Cloud, so even Google Cloud is welcomed into our domain now, and it's your pick and choice. You know, like how many types of platforms you're using in AWS versus Azure. You can take different platforms or different types of appliances in each and tailor the way you want this. But the crux of the situation is it's as simple as that. You can bring everybody in one giant domain without the complexity of that overhead, and that's the problem we solve. Kirk, you're on mute if you're saying something.
There we go. Better now?
Yes,
the
sir.
infamous mute button. We are approaching time here, but we do have one more topic that I want to get to quickly, and that's really in and around adapting for future cloud needs. So, Chris, maybe start with you. cloud native applications versus traditional applications running in the cloud. Talk about some of the what can be some of the challenges there, and just some of the key points that our attendees need to be mindful of as it relates to really native cloud applications, and then traditional applications that have typically been supported or running on bare metal. Yeah.
So one of the biggest changes that we've seen in cloud over the past 5 years is a change in perspective on what cloud is good for. When cloud caught on, when it caught fire and got all of the momentum, it was all about your public presence on the internet, right? It's what you put out there for others to consume. Rightly so. It's a great use case for that. But what we're seeing now is more and more companies have bought into the idea of adopting cloud for the workloads that would traditionally run in their office on a pizza box server or a tower server in a closet somewhere or in a data center where they have a colo, right? They are running a quote unquote traditional computing workload, traditional applications in public cloud, rather than trying to forklift everything into software as a service or cloud native applications. The reality is you can get IT transformation without having to rewrite your application stack. You can get IT transformation and cloud adoption without having to go to cloud native or third generation web apps, right? You can run traditional infrastructure apps in the cloud as long as you take the time to determine how that fits into your overall network architecture, how you're building your SD-WAN, what's talking to what are your bandwidth and latency requirements. If you plan that out on the front end, like we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, then you can run your traditional in-office apps in the cloud and have a better experience and a lower cost and a lower maintenance requirements than you've ever had running it in a closet somewhere. So that shift in mindset from, well, I don't have any third generation web apps, or I don't have any cloud native apps, that's gone away. And now companies are using cloud in a much more powerful way to run the software and systems that they would have normally had in office.
So let's that's really good. Let's also talk about the concept of multiple, a multi-cloud strategy, right? Which is going to be applicable to the majority of organizations that are joining us today. Again, just as SaaS has continued to evolve and things of that nature. So maybe Chris, from your standpoint, why would you choose to have multiple cloud providers if you're doing it by choice? I think we'll agree there are times that you really have no choice in regards to that. But let's talk about multiple cloud. Why would you have multiple cloud providers? Why does that make sense from an architecture standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're going to get forced into it, whether it be through acquisition or something else. Sometimes you're going to inherit a cloud environment that you didn't expect. We all live in that world where the business brings us things and we say, okay, we'll do our best, and we learn it and we go. But the reality is, even beyond those forced scenarios, there's good reasons to consider multi-cloud as well. The cost structure of how you run different workloads is different in every single cloud. The types of workloads that are best suited towards Azure and the pricing model that they use are not the same as the best workloads that are suited towards AWS and the pricing model that they use. And the reality is, for many businesses, there is still a certain amount that translates best to an on-premise or a private cloud environment in a data center. So the idea that you can stick 100% of your IT infrastructure in one choice and you've correctly optimized it is not really realistic, right? That's too simplistic to think that any business is going to be that easy. When you break it down and you actually translate to say, where do I get my best ROI? Where do I get my best value for this particular workload versus another? You're going to find that different workloads translate better to different types. Some will translate better to private cloud, some will translate better to public cloud, some better to AWS, some better to Google, some better to Azure. That's the reality of the way that each of these providers has carved out their own segment in the industry. They don't want to be all exactly the same. And so each of them has optimized around a different use case. depending on how many use cases your business consumes, you may need to optimize into 2 or 3 of those to do it the right way.
Awesome. So let's talk about Kenneth, maybe shifting to you. Let's talk about how Meraki has specifically solutioned for these types of scenarios in which we have multiple cloud environments within this particular customer's ecosystem, and some of the tools that Meraki has developed to make that a much more cohesive experience.
So the main part about having a multi-cloud deployment, the problems are the same when you're moving your entire compute architecture to the cloud over multiple providers. The idea is also the same for the network. So the main problem with having this access given to multiple locations in a pre-COVID world was fine, because everybody's in one location, all your users are sitting behind one gigantic firewall, 500 users, 600 users, all going to different clouds doing their job. But now post-COVID, a lot of users are first working from home, some are remote, some are hybrid. It's not the same anymore. That's where Cisco comes in, and Cisco has been like, okay, everybody's trying to access everything else. They're working from home. We trust them, but can we trust their devices? Can we actually factor in BYOD when they're trying to access these multi-cloud environments? So the network now becomes a problem. The firewalling becomes a problem. And the entire world, especially in the firewall industry, the security industry, the cybersecurity fray of things, is moving towards the idea of having one giant firewall on the cloud. So now, instead of directly connecting to multiple clouds, instead of connecting back to your office, instead of investing in that heavy machinery, like for example, getting a MX450, it's a big firewall, it supports 10,000 clients. Why do you need a firewall that supports 10,000 clients to do your firewalling? And 60% of your workforce is remote. It's not a justified cost. So architectures like these are getting complicated because of the way of life. I call COVID a way of life now because it is what it is. So the idea of the future, what Gartner has coined a term called SASE, is basically Secure Access Service Edge, an idea of a giant firewall where each and every site independently, let's say you have 10 office locations and 20 people working from home, each site would connect to this firewall using a VPN or SD-WAN, and each individual user would also connect to that single firewall, and then that firewall would broker the connection to different clouds. So Cisco's response, or any network vendor's response to this architecture, is to make sure that, hey, you want to go to multiple clouds, fine, we're okay with that, but you have to go through us, because securing that connection is super important. It's very easy because people are working from home. It's very easy to be a point of vulnerability now. So SASE is a solution which ties multiple things together. There is no firewall in the world that can be built. That's a reality of things. There's no firewall in the world that can be built to protect you completely. You're not going to get everything in every firewall if you're having a connection. Let's say you're looking for HTTPS inspection or radius-based service. Every firewall is different. Every company orchestrates that connection differently. With Cisco Meraki, we've kept it very, very simple. All we do is we are taking Cisco's infrastructure and we're adding it into our SD-WAN domain. So we are coming to a point in our Cisco Meraki lifecycle where we are going to welcome Cisco Umbrella SIG, or Secure Internet Gateway, to be that giant firewall for us. So all we will do is we'll give all of your 20 locations to Cisco Umbrella for firewalling, and each of your individual users can either come to our location or our MX devices, or they can directly connect via or any connect or some stuff like that. So they directly go to this giant cloud or giant firewall, which is now leased to everybody using a term called firewall as a service. So that's where we assume, or we are calculating, the world will go in a couple of years. So that, according to me, is going to be the next big thing. If you're looking at an infrastructure ready for these multiple cloud deployments, your network has to be ready to scale to that level. Because if you're investing now, invest in something that's going to be ready to adopt or work with that architecture. And that's what my recommendations to my customers always are. Like, whenever you're trying to go to multiple clouds, make sure that you're thinking about all the security aspects that would come with it. It's not a straightforward answer. It's not one single firewall that's the solution here. it's going to be a distributed architecture, and that's where Cisco comes in.
Great. Great information, gentlemen. We are running up on the end of our time. I know that we indicated we were going to try to leave some time for Q&A. I tell you what, let's just for ensuring that we're being respectful of everyone's time here. If you do have a question, please submit that. We will be sending out an email following this webinar. If you have any questions concerning the material that we covered today, please respond to that email with your questions, and we will be sure that we get those answers back to you. But we do have a giveaway here, I think, Heather. So we have chosen through a randomizer 5 attendees to receive their choice of Meraki apparel. And those winners are, Heather, drum roll, if you want to send me the name via Teams, I think. Perhaps?
Yes, those names are Wendy Barella, Chad White, Richard Ori, Steve Dramones, and Steve Keller.
All right, congratulations. So we will be following up, our marketing team will be following up with you within the next 24 hours to provide you with what your choices are, and then we'll get those items shipped out to you right away. So on that note, we'll wrap up our discussion today. Again, certainly if you have any questions, please respond to the email that'll be coming out again following this webinar. Kenneth, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I think this information was extremely valuable. A lot of great material in there. And again, for our attendees, we'll be following up by an email again in the next few days with an on-demand link to this. And it's a great opportunity to try and test the Meraki stack for free in your own environment without obligations to commitment through the partnership between OneSource and Cisco Meraki. So if you're interested in quote unquote taking a test drive, which I would highly recommend, this is really a great opportunity for you to do so in a no-cost engagement. To get a better understanding of whether it's the right fit for your business. So encourage you to please take advantage of that as well. So again, want to thank all of our attendees for their participation today. Certainly thank you for your time, and I hope everyone stays healthy and safe. And until we talk again, have a great remainder of the week. Thanks, everyone.